What if the moment Captain America stepped onto a Starfleet transporter pad, the ideals he fought for on Earth were put on trial by an entire galaxy that no longer believed in heroes? The alarms are already screaming when the light takes him. 1 second, Steve Rogers is standing on scorched vibranium and broken alien steel. Shield cracked, breath burning in his lungs. The next, his body dissolves into columns of blue-white energy, ripped apart, molecule by molecule. There is no warning, no explanation, just the feeling of falling forward into something impossibly cold and impossibly precise, like the universe itself has reached down and taken him by the spine. For 30 seconds, maybe 40. Time doesn't behave. Here Steve Rogers is nowhere. Then suddenly, he's everywhere. He reassembles on a circular platform bathed in sterile light. The air smells different, clean, filtered, too perfect. His boots hit the deck with a dull metallic echo that doesn't belong to any battlefield he knows. Around him, walls curve instead of corner. Consoles glow without keys. People stare. They're human. Mostly. Some aren't. Uniforms snap into focus firsts, sleek, color divisions, insignias, shaped like stars instead of flags. Hands hover near devices that aren't guns, but feel just as dangerous. A woman steps forward, her posture rigid, eyes sharp but not afraid. "Compute," she says quietly. "Confer containment field status." A calm, bodiless voice replies. "Containment field stable." Containment. Steve's jaw tightens. His instincts scream at him to move, to assess exits, to raise the shield, but his shield is gone. His hands curl into fists instead. "I'm going to need an explanation," he says, voice steady, even as his pulse hammers. "Because wherever I am, I didn't come here by choice." The woman studies him like a historical artifact that just stood up and started talking. "You're aboard a Federation starship," she says, "USS Horizon. And according to every database we have, you shouldn't exist." That word lands harder than any punch. Shouldn't exist. Steve takes a breath. He's done this before, waking up in futures that don't recognize him, worlds that moved on without asking permission. But this is different. This isn't just time. This is distance. Scale. The stars outside the viewport reel, stars, not projections, stretch endlessly, uncaring. "Ma'am," Steve says, choosing respect over suspicion. "I don't know what a Federation is, but if you've got people in danger, I can help." A murmur ripples through the bridge. Help. The idea seems almost outdated. The woman finally introduces herself as Captain Alana Tevrin, her ears subtly pointed, her expression controlled to the edge of cold. "This ship does not operate on vigilante intervention," she says. "We follow principles, non-interference, order, protocol." Steve nods slowly. "So do I." But already, he can feel the fracture forming between them, because moments later, the view screen flares to life, revealing a distant planet engulfed in fire. Cities burning. Civil war tearing continents apart. A civilization begging for aid they will never receive, not because Starfleet can't help, but because they won't. "The Prime Directive," Tevrin says, almost to herself. "We observe. We do not interfere." Steve stares at the destruction, teeth clenched, chest tight. He's seen this exact moment play out 1,000 times across 1,000 wars, the moment where good people decide doing nothing is cleaner than doing what's right. "Captain," he says quietly, with respect. "That's not neutrality. That's a choice." The bridge goes silent, and in that silence, Steve Rogers realizes something terrifying. In this future, heroism isn't illegal, but it might be obsolete. And if he chooses to stand by Starfleet's rules, billions may die. If he breaks them, he could shatter the very ideals this civilization was built on. The stars don't care which choice he makes, but the galaxy is about to find out what happens. When Captain America refuses to look away, what happens when a man built on clear right and wrong is forced to serve in a universe where morality is buried under rules written to avoid responsibility? Steve doesn't sleep that first night. Starfleet quarters are quiet in a way that feels artificial, like the ship itself is holding its breath. The bed adjusts to his posture automatically. The lights dim on command, but none of it matters. His mind is still on the planet burning behind them. The screams he couldn't hear but somehow still felt. The door chimes softly. "Enter," he says, already standing, Captain Tevrin steps inside, hands folded behind her back. Up close, Steve can see the strain she hides beneath discipline, not fear, conflict. "You are not confined," she says. "That was intentional, I noticed," Steve replies. "He wanted to see what I'd do. And I stayed," he says. "Because running wouldn't help anyone." Her eyes narrow slightly. "You understand restraint better than most warriors I've studied." "I'm not a warrior," Steve says. "I'm a soldier who learned the hard way that winning doesn't always mean surviving." She considers that. "Then Starfleet Command has reviewed your existence, your physiology, your history, or what we can reconstruct of it. And," Steve asks, "they believe you are dangerous." Tevrin says plainly, "Not because of your strength, because of your convictions." Steve almost smiles. "Almost. They're offering you a choice," she continues. "Remain aboard as a cultural anomaly under observation, or formally join Starfleet." That gets his attention. "Join, you would undergo accelerated training," she says. "Learn our laws, our ethics, our limitations. In return, you would be given a voice. Not command, but influence." Steve turns toward the viewport. Stars drift by like distant fires. "And if I don't like those limitations, then you will be expected to obey them anyway," Tevrin says. "That is what separates Starfleet from chaos." He exhales slowly. This feels familiar. Another uniform, another oath, another promise that rules can hold back the worst of humanity. "I've worn flags before," Steve says. "They don't always mean what people think they mean." "Starfleet is not an empire," Tevrin replies sharply. "We don't conquer, we don't dominate." "No," Steve says. "You just watch." The tension thickens between them. For a moment, Steve thinks she might order him detained after all. Instead, she does something unexpected. "Come with me," she says. Minutes later, Steve stands in a vast chamber. Starfleet Academy's holographic ethics hall. Images surround them. First contact scenarios, failed interventions, civilizations erased by well-intended interference. "This," Tevrin says, "is why we do nothing." Steve watches a simulation where Starfleet saves a planet, only to destabilize it decades later, triggering a war that kills billions. The images are brutal, unforgiving. "And this," Steve says quietly, "is another simulation play. Starfleet observes a genocide and leaves, is why doing nothing doesn't save your soul." Tevrin closes her eyes for a fraction of a second. "You think morality is simple?" "No," Steve replies. "I think it's heavy, and somebody still has to carry it." Days pass. Training begins. Steve learns phasers aren't weapons of dominance but tools of restraint. He learns diplomacy, alien psychology, temporal law. He struggles not physically, but philosophically. Every lesson feels like a compromise. Then the distress call comes. A pre-warp world. A dying sun. Evacuation possible. Intervention forbidden. On the bridge, officers wait for the captain's command. Starfleet protocol demands withdrawal. Steve steps forward before he can stop himself. He can save them. "We cannot," Tevrin says. "If we interfere, they die. If you don't," Steve snaps, then catches himself. "Softer now. I've lived with that kind of silence." It never stops screaming. The bridge holds its breath. Tevrin looks at him not as a relic, not as a threat, but as a mirror. And Steve sees the question forming behind her eyes. If Starfleet bends its rules just once, where does it stop? And if it doesn't, what kind of future is it protecting? Outside the viewport, the dying star flares brighter. Time is running out. What if the first time Captain America truly acted as a Starfleet officer, it meant disobeying the very directive that defined the Federation? The order never comes. Seconds stretch into something fragile and sharp as glass. The dying star pulses on the view screen, each flare a reminder that millions of lives are measured in heartbeats now. Steve can hear his own breathing, slow and controlled, the same rhythm he used before charging into gunfire decades ago. "Captain," the science officer says quietly, "window for evacuation is closing." Tevrin's hands remain clasped behind her back. Her gaze doesn't leave the screen. "Options," she says. "Option 1, the officer replies, "we withdraw and document the extinction event." Steve flinches at the word. "Option 2, the officer continues, "we violate the Prime Directive. We reveal ourselves. We alter the natural development of the civilization permanently." Steve steps forward. Option 3, he says, voice steady but charged. You don't reveal yourselves. You don't rule them. You don't stay. You just give them a chance to live. The bridge turns toward him. Tevrin finally faces him. And how do you propose that? Minimal contact. Steve says, Autumn, evacuation beacons. Relocate them to a habitable system. Wipe the trail. No gods. No saviors. Just help. Silence. Then, impossibly, Tevrin nods once. Prepare evacuation protocols, she says. Every officer snaps into motion. The ship hums as transporters power up. Steve watches cities dissolve into light, not in destruction, but in rescue. For the first time since arriving in this future, his chest loosens, but relief is short-lived. Captain. Tactical says Starfleet Command is hailing us. Priority channel. Tevrin doesn't answer immediately. She looks at Steve. You understand what this means? I do, he says. Someone has to. The image of a stern admiral fills the screen. Captain Tevrin, the admiral says coldly, you are in direct violation of Federation law. Stand down. We are saving lives. Tevrin replies. You are endangering the moral foundation of the Federation. The admiral snaps. And you, his eyes flick to Steve, are the cause. Steve steps into frame. Sir, he says, voice respectful but unyielding. With all due respect, laws are supposed to protect people, not excuse abandoning them. The admiral's expression hardens. This is exactly why your kind does not belong in Starfleet. The channel cuts. Moments later, sensors scream. Multiple warp signatures, tactical reports. Federation ship. Steve's stomach drops. They're coming to stop us. No, Tevrin says quietly. They're coming to make an example. The evacuation completes just as Starfleet vessels drop out of warp, surrounding the horizon. Weapons, power, up, not firing, but ready. A show of force. Tevrin straightens. All hands, maintain course. Steve feels the weight settle on him fully now. This wasn't just about one planet. This was about redefining what Starfleet stood for, proving it couldn't change. Captain, he says, low. If they arrest you, they will, she says. And you. He nods. Then let it be for something that mattered. Security officers arrive. Hands hover near stunned settings. The bridge crew watches in silence as Tevrin and Steve are escorted away. In the brig, the doors seal. With a hiss. You don't regret it, Tevrin says. More statement than question. Now Steve replies, do you? She hesitates. Just for a moment. No. Hours pass. Or days. Time loses shape. Then the ship shudders. Explosions echo through the hull. Red alert blares. The lights flicker violently. Steve grips the bars. That's not an arrest. Maneuver. No, Tevrin says. Eyes sharp now. That's an attack. A hostile force unknown, powerful, has ambushed the fleet, drawn by the evacuation. Starfleet ships are falling back, unprepared for a war they never wanted. And suddenly, the Federation needs a soldier who knows how to stand when everything else collapses. The brig door unlocks. Steve looks up. As alarms scream and understands. The irony all too well. The galaxy didn't want Captain America. Now it's about to need him. What if the very values Starfleet tried to suppress are the only reason it survives the war it never prepared for? The brig door slides open, smoke rolling in before the light. The deck tilts beneath Steve's feet as the horizon shudders again. This time hard enough to throw a guard against the bulkhead. Red alert floods the corridor, the calm computer voice, now edged with urgency. Unknown vessels have breached defensive perimeter. Steve doesn't wait for instructions. He never has. He moves instinctively, catching the guard before he falls, pulling the phaser free from the man's shaking hand. The weapon feels wrong in his grip to clean, too controlled, but it will do. He hands it back anyway. You're going to need that, Steve says. Stun only. These people don't shoot to scare. The guard blinks. How do you know? Because neither did Hydra. Steve replies, already moving. On the bridge, chaos reigns. Consoles spark. Officers shout coordinates, casualty reports, stacking faster than they can be spoken. On the view screen, the enemy finally reveals itself. Obsidian vessels shaped like blades, cutting through space with brutal efficiency. They don't broadcast. They don't warn. They strike the Vrax. Tactical says, voice tight. An expansionist species. No diplomacy record. They eliminate civilizations before contact. Steve watches a Starfleet cruiser split in half, in a silent flash of light. No survivors. So that's what happens, he mutters, when you wait too long. Tevrin stands at the center of the storm, injured but unbroken, blood running from her temple. When she sees Steve, something unreadable passes through her eyes. You were right, she says quietly. We trained for restraint, not resistance. Steve steps beside her, eyes locked on the screen. Then let's adapt. Starfleet protocol, fractures under pressure, orders conflict. Ships hesitate, unwilling to fire lethally, even as they're being torn apart. Steve feels the familiar rage rise, not wild, not reckless, but sharp and focused. You can't outthink an enemy that doesn't care about your rules, he says, but you can outlast them. How? Tevrin asks. Steve turns to the crew. You've got superior tech, superior coordination. There's something they don't expect, people willing to protect each other instead of their own safety. Stop fighting like observers. Fight like a unit. It's not a speech, it's a reminder. Tevrin gives the order. Formation shifts. Ships interlock fields, shielding one another instead of spreading out. Phasers fire in controlled bursts, disabling engines instead of chasing kills. Boarding parties stand down. Rescue teams deploy mid-battle. The Vrax hesitate, just for a second, and that's enough. The tide doesn't turn cleanly. It never does, but it slows. Starfleet losses stabilize. The Vrax withdraw, not defeated, but surprised, calculating. When silence finally falls, space is littered with debris and drifting escape pods. The horizon limps forward, battered but alive. In the aftermath, Steve stands alone in the observation deck, staring at the stars. He feels it now, the shift, the quiet fear beneath Starfleet's composure, the realization that the galaxy is not waiting for them to be ready. Tevrin joins him. Calmander's rescinded the arrest order, she says. Temporarily. Let me guess, Steve replies. They want results. They want you, she says, as a symbol or a weapon. They haven't decided which. Steve exhales slowly. He's been both before. Neither ends well. What about the Vrax, he asks. They will return, Tevrin says. And next time, they will adapt to us. Steve nods. So will we. But deep down, he knows the real battle hasn't started yet. Not with the Vrax, with Starfleet itself. With admirals who fear what he represents. With the Federation forced to choose between its ideals and its survival. And when that choice comes, Steve Rogers may have to decide whether wearing this uniform means changing it, or tearing it apart. Far beyond sensor range, Vrax ships regroup, their leaders analyzing data from the battle. One image repeats again and again, a human male, standing at the center of Starfleet resistance. They don't call him Captain, they call him a variable, and variables must be eliminated. What if the enemy studying Captain America understands him better than the leaders he now serves, and plans to break Starfleet by breaking him first? The message arrives without encryption. It cuts through Starfleet channels like a blade through silk, overriding security protocols that were never meant to fail. Every screen aboard the Horizon flickers, then locks onto a single image, a dark chamber lit by cold, angular light. A Vrax commander steps forward, taller than any human, its armor etched with symbols that pulse like a heartbeat. Captain America, the creature says, voice translated but stripped of warmth. We have studied your wars. Steve feels the bridge freeze around him. No one moves. No one breathes. You are the anomaly, the Vrax continues. Starfleet is predictable. You are not. Tevrin steps beside Steve. End transmission, she orders. The Vrax tilts its head. Observe, it replies. The image shifts. A Federation colony burns. Not the one they saved. Another. Families running. Starfleet vessels holding position at a distance too far to intervene, bound by orders that came too late. You taught them to resist, the Vrax says. Now they will watch others die because of you. Steve's hands clench. This is the war inside his warther. Same cruelty Hydra used, the same calculus Thanos wielded. Make the hero choose who suffers. What do you want? Steve asks. Withdraw, the Vrax says. Return to Earth, or your Federation will fracture beneath the weight of your contradictions. The transmission ends. The bridge erupts. Officers argue. Fear bleeds into discipline. Starfleet Command responds minutes later with orders that feel heavier than chains. Steve is to be removed from frontline operations, reassigned, contained. He's right, one admiral says over the channel, not realizing Steve can hear. The Vrax are exploiting him. No, Steve says aloud, stepping forward. They're exploiting your fear of what I represent. Tevrin doesn't interrupt. She lets him speak. They're counting on you to protect your rules instead of your people. Steve continues. If you sideline me, they win without firing another shot. Silence. Then, this is not a debate, the admiral replies. Stand down, Commander Rogers. Commander. The word tastes strange, earned conditional. Steve nods slowly. I won't disobey, he says. But I won't run either. Later, alone in his quarters, Steve stares at his reflection. No helmet, no shield. Just a man aging slower than his ideals. He's lost friends to wars built on fear. He's watched institutions choose safety over justice. He won't watch it happen again. Tevrin enters without ceremony. Starfleet believes you are a liability, she says. The crew believes you are hope. And you? Steve asks. She meets his gaze. I believe the Federation has forgotten why it explores. Steve smiles faintly. Then we're on the same side. They plan quietly. Not rebellion. Preparation. If the Vrax wants Steve isolated, he'll do the opposite each. Train. Instill resilience, not in weapons, but in people. Across Starfleet, crews begin changing formations tighter, rescue protocols faster, commanders thinking beyond directives. Not because of orders. Because of example, the Vrax notice. Their next strike is surgical. A deep space research station. Civilians, scientists. No strategic value except one thing. It's where Starfleet has quietly reassigned Steve Rogers. The trap snaps shut as Vrax ships to cloak, surrounding the station in a perfect ring. Shields fail in seconds. Escape pods are disabled. Tevrin's voice crackles over comms. Steve, we're too far. Reinforcements won't arrive in time. Steve looks out at the stars, calm settling over him like an old coat. Then I'll hold them, alone, she asks. No, he replies, as station personnel arm themselves with whatever they can find. With everyone they underestimated. The Vrax commander appears again on the screen. Observe, it says. This is where heroes end. Steve steps forward, squaring his shoulders. No, he says quietly. This is where they remind you why you're afraid of them. The station shakes as boarding begins. And for the first time since leaving Earth, Steve Rogers knows he may not survive this fight, but the Federation just might. What if Captain America's last stand isn't about winning a battle but about proving to an entire civilization that courage can be taught? The first Vrax breach rips through the outer hull like paper. Metal screams. Gravity stutters. Somewhere deep in the station, civilians cry out as emergency bulkheads slam shut. Steve barely notices the chaos anymore. His world narrows to motion, timing, people. Listen to me, he says over the intercoms, voice steady, cutting through panic. They want you afraid. Don't give it to them. Pair up. Watch each other's backs. Nobody stands alone. The Vrax board in silent stall, armored, efficient. No taunts, no hesitation. They move like a machine that learned how to walk. Steve moves first. He doesn't charge, he redirects. A Vrax soldier lunges. Steve pivots, uses the enemy's momentum, slams it into a bulkhead hard enough to dent duranium. Another fire. Steve dives, rolls, comes up behind a console, yanks a power conduit loose. Sparks explode, overloading the Vrax shields, just long enough for a civilian security officer to stun it. You see that? Steve shouts. They bleed, they fall. Keep moving. Across the station, something changes. People stop hiding. Engineers use tools as weapons. Medics drag the wounded to safety instead of freezing in place. Fear doesn't vanish, but it stops being in control. On the bridge of the horizon, Tevrin watches, the feed in silence. Casualty projections drop. Not because Steve is stronger than the Vrax, but because he's made everyone else stronger too. Starfleet Command finally breaks its hesitation. Authorized intervention, an admiral says grimly. All ships, engage. Warp signatures flare across space as Starfleet vessels arrive, not scattered, not cautious, but unified. They don't just fire, they shield the station. They pull escape pods free. They fight like people who've remembered why they exist. The Vrax retreat again, but not before their commander locks eyes with Steve through a shattered viewport. This outcome was not calculated. It says, "You have altered the equation." Steve wipes blood from his brow. Get used to it. The station survives. Barely. In the aftermath, Steve sits alone among the wreckage, exhaustion finally catching up to him. For the first time since arriving in this future, he feels old, not weak, just heavy. Tevrin approaches quietly. "Starfleet Council has issued a formal inquiry," she says, "and a commendation." Steve snorts softly. "That's a first. They want you promoted," she continues. "Strategic command, advisory authority across multiple fleets." Steve looks up at her. "They want to put me behind a desk. They want to keep you where you can't embarrass them," she corrects gently. Steve stands, gazing out at the stars again. Somewhere out there, the Vrax are watching, adapting, planning something worse. "I didn't come here to climb ranks," he says. "I came here because people needed help, and they still do," Tevrin says, "more than ever." She hesitates, then adds, "The Federation is changing. Slowly, painfully, because of you." Steve shakes his head. "Not because of me, because they chose to." A message pings in long-range sensors. A Vrax fleet, larger than before, heading not for the frontier, but for the heart of Federation space. Billions at risk. Worlds unprepared. Tevrin's voice tightens. "If they reach Earth." Steve straightens, resolve settling in like steel. "Then we make sure they don't. But this time, it won't be about bending rules. It will be about whether the Federation is ready to become the kind of future worth saving. What if the final battle for the Federation isn't fought at its borders, but in the hearts of those who must decide what they're willing to become to survive?" The Federation doesn't panic. It fractures. Worlds argue. Councils debate. Admirals calculate acceptable losses with cold precision. The Vrax fleet advances anyway, cutting through neutral space with terrifying inevitability. Their trajectory clear. Narth, Vulcan, Andoria. Symbols, pillars. Break those, and the Federation collapses from the inside. Steve stands before the Federation Council, alone at the center of a chamber built to dwarf individuals. Holographic representatives flicker around him, species of every shape and philosophy, united by fear more than purpose. "You're asking us to abandon the Prime Directive," one delegate says sharply. "No," Steve replies. "I'm asking you to remember why you wrote it." Murmurs ripple through the chamber. "The Prime Directive was never meant to protect ideals at the cost of lives." Steve continues. "It was meant to stop conquest, exploitation, ego. But the Vrax aren't a moral dilemma. They're an extinction event." An admiral interjects. "And if we become more like militarized, more aggressive, we lose what makes us different." Steve meets his gaze. "If you refuse to defend yourselves, you lose the future that makes those differences matter." Silence falls, not agreement, not rejection. The hardest kind. The kind where everyone knows he's right, and fears what that means. Tevrin steps forward. "We don't need to abandon who we are," she says. "We need to expand it. Defense without domination. Strength without conquest. For vote comes down to one world, Earth. History hangs on the same planet that once froze a soldier in ice because it was ready for peace yet. Authorization granted. For the first time in its history, Starfleet prepares not just to explore but to stand its ground. Steve takes command not as a general, but as a coordinator. Fleets interlock. Civilians are evacuated early. Worlds are shielded not individually, but collectively. The Federation doesn't try to outgun the Vrax. It outlasts them. When the battle comes, it's everywhere at once. Space burns. Starfleet ships take hits, meant for transports. Medical vessels operate under fire. Commanders make impossible choices and make them together. Steve is on the bridge of the horizon when the Vrax flagship breaks through, larger than anything they've faced. Its weapons tear through shields like they aren't there. "This is it," Tactical whispers. Steve grips the rail, eyes steady. "No," he says, "this is what we trained for." He orders a maneuver no Starfleet manual would ever recommend drawing the flagship's fire. Sacrificing the horizon's shields to expose a weakness no one else could reach. Steve Tevrin says quietly, "We won't survive this." He nods. "I know." The horizon surges forward. The Vrax flagship fires. Light, heat, silence, then impact. The horizon's hull fractures, but the maneuver works. The flagship falters, its formation breaking. Starfleet strikes as one. The Vrax fleet begins to fall, back not because they're defeated, but because the cost has become unacceptable. As the battlefield quiets, damage reports flood in. Losses are heavy, but Earth still shines. Vulcan still stands. The Federation survives. Barely an erect bridge. Steve sinks to one knee. Breath-ragged Tevrin rushes to him, gripping his shoulders. "You did it," she says. "No," Steve replies, looking at the stars. "They did." Rescue teams arrive. Medics work frantically. Steve feels himself slipping not into death, but into something quieter. Completion. As he's carried away, he hears a young officer whisper, "That's Captain America." Steve manages a faint smile. "No," he murmurs. "Just a good man trying to do the right thing." But the galaxy has already decided what he is, and the future will never look at heroes the same way again. What if Captain America's greatest victory, Eason T surviving the final battle, but choosing what kind of legend the future is allowed to remember? Steve wakes too quiet, not the sterile quiet of a lab, not the tense quiet before combat. This is different turned, the kind that follows grief and survival in equal measure. Soft light filters through transparent aluminum windows. Earth hangs below, blue and whole, scarred but alive. For a moment, Steve wonders if he's dreaming again, if this is another future he doesn't belong to. Then he feels the ache in his chest, the weight in his bones. The familiar cost of choosing to stand in front of the blast instead of behind it. He's in a Starfleet medical facility orbiting Earth. Tevrin stands nearby, no captain's posture now, just someone who stayed. "You've been unconscious for 6 days, she says. The council was not optimistic. Steve exhales slowly. Figures. The Vrax have withdrawn beyond Federation space. She continues. They will not return. Not soon. Not to us. Steve turns his head toward the planet. Because they lost. Because they learned, Tevrin replies. That the Federation will not be easy prey. That we will defend without becoming them. A long silence stretches between them. They're building statues, she adds quietly. On multiple worlds. Steve closes his eyes. Then they didn't learn enough. Tevrin almost smiles. The weeks that follow feel unreal. Starfleet reforms not loudly, not radically, but honestly. The Prime Directive is not erased, it's clarified. Intervention is no longer a sin when extinction is the alternative. Compassion is no longer treated as weakness, that must be hidden behind protocol. And as Steve Rogers, they offer him everything. Admiral rank, strategic command, a permanent place in the heart of Federation leadership, a future where his voice could shape centuries. He refuses IV. Seen what happens when symbols outlive the people they're meant to serve, Steve tells the council. You don't need another authority figure. You need reminders. Of what? An elder asks. Steve looks around the chamber at species who once feared one another, now united by shared scars. If why you explore, why you help, why you don't look away. He resigns his commission quietly. No ceremony, no speech, just a uniform folded with care. On his last day aboard the Horizon, the crew lines the corridor anyway. Engineers, medics, officers who once thought heroism was inefficient. They stand straighter now. You changed Starfleet, one of them says. Steve shakes his head. You changed yourselves. A shuttle carries him away from the fleet, toward a small outpost on the edge of Federation space. No title, no command. Just a man who helps train rescue crews, who teaches diplomacy through listening, who steps in when fear threatens to make good people freeze. Stories spread anyway. They say Captain America joined Starfleet and taught the Federation how to fight. They're wrong. He taught it how to choose. Years later, decades later, young cadet will ask who he really was. A soldier, a hero, a relic from a simpler age. The answer will never be simple, because somewhere between the stars and the ideals that bind them, Captain America proved something the galaxy will never forget. That honor does not belong to one world, that courage does not require permission, and that the final frontier doesn't need perfect beings to protect it. It just needs good ones, willing to stand up, even when the universe tells them to stay seated.